What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to the brother Aaron Holmes for the $25 donation via the Cash App. He has a question. He said, if the Cavs win the championship, would this be the first time that two small guards have won a title? Now, when he says small guards, I'm assuming he means guards, I'd say under 6'4". It's generally considered a small guard in today's league, right? Yeah, I'd say under 6'4". And I'm also going to assume that you mean without a dominant big man on the team because, for instance, you know, the Celtics had in their backcourt Bill Sharman, who I believe was 6 feet tall, and Bob Cousy, who I believe was 6'1". That's a small guard tandem, but their front court, of course, they had Bill Russell, the most dominant defensive player, arguably in the history of the game, definitely that era. And their front court was generally considered big for that era. Then, of course, you know, with the Houston Rockets in 1994, at least, their backcourt consisted of Vernon Maxwell, who I believe was 6'4". Kenny Smith was like 6'3", and I think Sam Cassell was 6'3", coming off the bench. He was a rookie then. So, and you know, that was just smallish backcourt, but of course, Akeem Olajuwon was their center. So, I believe you mean when the two best players on the team were the small guards in the backcourt. Well, it has happened before. And generally speaking, it's pretty much well known. One of the great teams in recent history that was dominated by their backcourt. And then, you know, their backcourt, Frick and Frack, Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. They were the two best players on those bad boy teams. Now, Bill Laimbeer was okay. But you can make an argument, too, that the Pistons were the first team to win championships that did not have at least a borderline all-star level center. Although I think Bill Laimbeer was a lot better than Luke Longley. But yeah, you have Isaiah Thomas, who was about 6'1", 6'1", and Isaiah Thomas is considered, along with along with Allen Iverson, to be the greatest little guards ever played the game. Those two guys are generally considered 1 and 2. And Isaiah Thomas, you know, it's been said, had he been 4 or 5 inches taller, Isaiah Thomas may have went down as a top 5 or 10 player in the history of this game. Joe Dumars, at the time that they were winning championships, was probably the best on-ball defender in the NBA. And they definitely dominated that Detroit Pistons team. Now, don't get me wrong, that team had other pieces, of course, but they were the two best players on that team. I think another team that you could bring up that won a championship that was dominated by their backcourt, which is relatively small, would be the backcourt of the 1979 Seattle Supersonics. The backcourt, I consider that probably one of the top 10 backcourts in the history of the game. When you had a backcourt with Dennis Johnson, who was 6'4", and that's kind of like the cutoff. I think DJ was like 6'3.5", but they rounded him up to 6'4". But you had DJ, who was at his prime at that point in time, more of a slashing guard, defensive great. And then you had the recently departed Gus Williams. Gus Williams was 6'1". I think he was 6'1" or 6'2". Scoring phenom, always amongst the leaders in steals when he was healthy. That could have been one of the more dynamic backcourts if there wasn't that contractual dispute that ultimately led to Gus Williams leaving the Sonics for, I believe, the Bullets. And I'm trying to think of other teams that would qualify, because the thing is that most of the other teams, if they had small guards, because they did have smaller guards in the 70s that won championships, the thing is they usually had a dominant center. You know what I'm saying? Or the small guards were not the best players on the team. Whereas I think you pretty much can, it's really no doubt that Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are the two best players on the Cavaliers. But yeah, I mean, if the Cavs somehow won the championship, they would go down as one of the few short or small backcourt tandems who are clearly the best players on the team to win a championship. It doesn't really happen that often. In the history of this league, in the history of the NBA, up until the late 80s, championship teams were dominated by centers. Whether you're talking about George Mikan, whether you're talking about Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, obviously, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Willis Reed, Dave Cowens, even Jack Sikma on that Sonics team. He was good. Moses Malone, Robert Parrish, the list goes on and on. Bill Walton. When you look at those championship teams, for the most part, they almost always had a great center. Now, there are some exceptions. The 1975 Golden State Warriors did not have a great center. And unlike most of the teams in the 70s, where it was more of by committee scoring, whereas, teams were implementing the Lakers and the Boston Celtics, or the collegiate way of playing basketball, where these guys individually could go out there and drop 30 points if they wanted to, but they played within a team concept. Rick Barry, however, was dominating the Rock offensively, but he had a good squad around him. But he was the primary scorer, and ultimately they won the championship that year. Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes is another example of dominant centers and front court winning titles. So yeah, even when I think about the Pistons in 2004, Billups was 6'3", I believe, 6'3", 6'4", but Rip Hamilton was 6'6", 6'7", so that's not exactly a small backcourt. Yeah. So, and then plus, of course, they had the great Ben Wallace. So, yeah, when I'm thinking, no, I think those are really the two only examples I can think of. The 1979 Sonics and the 1989 and 90 Pistons are the only teams I can think of that have had two small guards dominate their offense, clearly be the best teams, the best players on those teams, and won the championship. And I'm still trying to scan recent teams. Yeah, that's the only teams teams I can think of. Steph Curry and Klay Thompson would not qualify. Steph is 6'3", but Klay is 6'5", 6'6". So, yeah. So anyway, tell me what you guys think about this.